All right, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you to the cluster for having me. My talk today is about trying to hold together these two very distinct qualities, diversity and specificity, and seeking ways to get the benefits of both. So this is a diagram by Giacomo Castagnola, and it maps the different modes of transport available in Lima. And you can see it's a very diverse offer, but catering to very specific needs of different groups of people. And I guess what I'm wondering is it possible to find this kind of mode in architecture? So as architects, we're very used to designing for specificity, for the single family with all their kind of nuances and particularities. This is a beautiful design by Atelier Bow Wow, where they've you can see over there the living room is reimagined as a library. Obviously, the family is very reads a lot. The small child's bedroom is in close proximity. It's a tiny little room next to the stairs, across from the kitchen. There's a real kind of intimacy in the understanding of these particular people and their particular situation. This is something that completely drops out when you start looking at mass-produced apartment housing, and particularly rental housing, and even more particularly affordable rental housing. And that's the kind of area that I'm quite interested in, particularly in Sydney. So this is a house that I just found on Domain for $650 a week in Zetland. And you can see some of the inbuilt biases that exist in the housing that we're producing. So the whole thing is covered with carpet. The kitchen is pushed right to the back of the plan. So that already, you can't be cooking with any kind of oils or any kind of, good smells. The bedrooms are really only enough for 2 people at a maximum. So there's only particular kind of cultural modes that this kind of housing would work for. And then as developers multiply these plans across the block in order to get economies of scale, and then they become multiplied across the city as the market norm, and not, the kind of developer mindset of being risk averse and just doing what is already accepted. And so the challenges, I think, for us as architects are twofold. One thing is that we've got to, how can we accommodate diversity? So this is an exercise by Bruno Minari, seeking comfort in an uncomfortable chair. And I think this is the situation that we're currently in with multi-unit housing. We're trying to adapt ourselves to these quite uncomfortable forms we find ourselves in. And it's an interesting image because it in one sense it's a critique of this terrible chair, but then it's also in praise of its possibilities and the infinite adaptability of us as people. I really question how we could design for the multiple without designing just for the average, the mean of all the differences that we have. How can we design for specific needs of different cultural practices, ages, the diversity of family types, as well as the diversity within each family? And the other thing I'd like to question, can we do it, I guess, without building in new stereotypes and designing only for the diversity that we have currently at the moment? Because we all know that cultures change and develop, and so how can the systems that we put in place continue to evolve? And can we be even more ambitious than that? Can we move beyond treating diversity as a problem to be solved and see it as a resource which we can draw upon to solve other problems in the city on a larger scale? So hybrid vigor is a concept in agriculture whereby 2 varieties of plants are crossed, and the resulting hybrid is more vigorous and more resilient, doesn't have the same problems of disease and pests as the previous 2 components. And what would be the architectural or urban equivalent of that? A way to tap into the wealth of new approaches, ideas and practices embedded in the diversity, which could begin to provide fresh approaches to the endemic problems that we face in Sydney. So the diversity of specifics, to start off with, looking at what are the kind of typical approaches that architects take to housing, which will cater for a multiple of uses throughout the lifetime of the building. So the Fukuoka housing by Stephen Hall is a kind of an exemplar of the kind of idea of flexibility within the unit. So you have walls that can open and shut, different volumes are created, that could be used in different ways, kind of both on a daily level, but then also extending out to, different changes in the family over time, over a longer period of time. So this approach tends to be quite expensive and tends towards kind of binary relations of spaces. Another approach is the idea of neutral function. The idea here is that rather than creating kind of complicated mechanisms to shift the boundaries of space, we build in a set of spaces that collectively can be used in different ways. So this is the dream house for Germans, a prefabricated, simple, 2-story, 140 square metre house. 4 different types of occupations are kind of worked through. This one for one large family using the 2 bedrooms at the top, living spaces below. This is for an option for 2 families split over the 2 levels. An option for a couple with or without children that work from home. And 4 singles in a kind of a cooperative arrangement. And the difference is it's not a lazy kind of design for everything approach to flexibility. It's designing for very specific things, but many of them. I think that's the distinction I want to draw. Another approach is the idea of creating diversity across the whole block. So you have new possibilities when you start to look at the block as a whole. In Sejima's Gifu apartments, a very rigid grid of almost identical sized rooms, public corridor, private corridor, loggia, dining space, tatami room, bedroom, are arranged in very different ways throughout the building and combined in different ways so that as a whole you have quite a diverse range of possibilities within the one building. Another similar but slightly different approach is that of additive dwelling, which you see in Nishizawa's Moriyama house. So Mr. Moriyama has built a family of small buildings on his lot in Tokyo, and at times he will occupy all of them as a single house. At other times he will lease or lend to his friends some of the rooms in different combinations and with different levels of overlap. So you can see some of the ways it gets used or could potentially be used over time. Another interesting approach by a group Elemental in Chile grew out of an academic studio investigating the issues of social housing in Chile. So they were looking at a site called Quinta Monroy, an inner city squatter settlement, which they used as the site for the first of their projects. And these kind of settlements were typically being moved out of the city to more affordable pieces of land. The people, of course, didn't want to be separated from their social and economic networks, and so they were looking at can you use the mechanisms of affordable housing to keep people in place but also improve the quality and durability of the housing. An interesting approach they took was really investigating the kind of government subsidy structure, which is typically that people would get half as a subsidy and then borrow half and then be able to build a complete house but then be in debt. But they were looking at a way that the subsidy could build a semi-complete house and then the people could infill using their own labour and materials and ingenuity the rest of the house. And so the basic premise is instead of giving people like a small bad house, give them half a good house. And so they started off with this. They started with the things that are difficult for people to build, the basic structure, the plumbing, and then over time people can add in their own. And this like enables not only an economic benefit, but people are able to choose the precise way, within a certain framework, the precise way in which they want to build. And so the concept of expandability is very central to this one. So I'll talk a little bit now about some projects that we've done at MAPA and the lot. And it's really, a lot of our work is based on ideas of people's participation. And as we saw in 1986 in Toongabbie, it's not really a new idea. That, you know, when you talk to people and you get them involved in the design of their housing, if it fits for them, it's going to work better. If it doesn't, you're going to get bad results. So asking tenants what they want is usually not something that community housing associations want to do or are interested in doing. They see it as kind of opening a can of worms, of blowing out the cost, raising people's expectations too high. And so we're interested in ways that you can do it. So the typical way that an architect would then approach it is to simply present kind of a few basically the same options, and then, you know. But we're interested in ways that it can become much more of a discussion, so where people can feed in what they're interested in and what they need, but at the same time be involved in quite a realistic discussion about the constraints, the costs. And even could you go beyond that to involve the broader community, who are generally, when you do kind of broader community consultations, you just get the squeaky wheels kind of pushing their agendas about property values or too much traffic or these kind of things. But is there another way to involve the broader community in discussions about how new developments are going to happen? Is the ideal. So one project we worked on in 2011 was the Cabot Bahayan Housing Cooperative. And so Cabot Bahayan is a group of one of the, I think there's something like 26 housing cooperatives in New South Wales, who basically, you can see they fit somewhere in that 3% orange triangle. So it's a very, very small part of the housing mix, but a very, very interesting part. They exist as part of public housing, so the housing stock that they've been living in for the past 15 years is Department of Housing New South Wales. But they are completely self-managed. They do all their own rent collection, all their own maintenance. And so they can spend money on maintenance, or it accrues as a kind of a rental surplus. So instead of paying anyone there's zero cost to government, basically, to run these cooperatives. And it goes into a fund which this particular cooperative and another one, Van Lang, were able to buy a piece of land in Canley Vale in order to develop and produce additional housing for the community. So, yeah, interesting things start to happen when you talk to people. You don't often get the things that you expect to hear, but there are things behind those things. So, for example, the bathroom slab, everyone was really very fixated on this point that the bathroom slab was like, why was the bathroom slab built above the rest of the house? It should be the other way around. This seemed to me like a tiny detail. Why is everyone so concerned about it? But like the more I talked to people, the more I understood about Filipino and Vietnamese kind of bathing. It's very exuberant, kind of using like a bowl of water. You splash everywhere. And so basically these people had to change their style of bathing in order to not get their carpet wet. And so that's why it was a big issue. Issues of the kitchen not being ventilated, again, is a common thing and easily solved. Not having carpet is a very common thing, I think, becoming quite normal now in Sydney to eradicate carpets. It's a very English thing that you would have permanent carpet to absorb all your smells and all your dust and dirt and nothing that you can take out. Putting a sink next to a toilet. Also interesting were the things that people didn't say, but that we could kind of observe just by going along and going to meetings. And it was kind of the ways that people were using space and the things that people were building, which were very interesting to us. So all the garages, for example, were used as these great kind of social spaces to have little barbecues. The original, it's like one of those gun barrel townhouse developments, and the original one, it was all planted with, very water sensitive native gardens. They ripped all that out and put in these beautiful kind of fruit orchards, which are now consistently winning the Auburn Gardening Award. One of the guys worked at a concrete testing factory, and so that was used as all the edging. So yeah, this is where we start to see how one of these kind of projects can start to comment on and suggest new ways that expand beyond just this single project. So looking at Sydney more generally, it's the second most unaffordable housing in the world at 9 times an annual income, and we're also number 1 for big houses. As you can see, this kind of thing. And we're also kind of eating up what's left of our food basin in Sydney. So these are some kind of, obvious big urban issues. And what Cabot Behind were able to do through basically their tactics of sharing things, they're able to get 6 families on a piece of land that would normally be reserved for 2 families. And then they're able to actually get much more of that land as common usage, or for each of those, they get to use more land than they would in the 2 family solution. They've all got private courtyards, open entry decks. There's a shared library and deck on the top. Here are some images of the final project. And these little entry spaces. The gardens up the front. Little outdoor cooking. And the car park, which is basically a festival space. Another example that we've done is the driveway house, a reverse granny flat. So this is Maisie, and she's a lady living in Penshurst. She is getting into her late 90s, and she was starting to get to the age where people were trying to suggest her to go to a nursing home. She didn't want to do that. She wanted to stay in the house that her husband had built. Meanwhile, her daughter was in pretty severe rental stress, and so the solution for the 2 of them was to build this secondary dwelling in the driveway, which enabled a carer to live, well, the daughter to live next to Maisie and look after her in her old age. And then coming back to this idea of, are there other ways for us to look at community consultation more broadly? I'll just go through a few of our experiments. So the Propositional was a project that we situated at the North Everleigh site, and basically it was a kind of a newspaper that you could take out, make a proposal for the site, and then feed it back in, and then we would republish the proposals of the people. We've recently just done a kind of an upscaled version of this down at a particularly interesting point between Millers Point and Barangaroo, where you can kind of make proposals for those 2 sites. It can also happen in quite a simple way, like this project we did in partnership with Popperbox and ICE, just really getting people to reflect on their own experiences of living in Cabramatta, and can also feed into potential plans for urban spaces. So, and we really try and be careful to open ourselves up to potential, all kinds of information, from people lying down to people passing by in their taxis and making suggestions. Yeah. So, thank you very much.